I'm gonna get right to the point. What do I mean by the MCU needs X-Men First Class? Well, let's start with the MCU formula. I am so done with the current MCU formula, and I know a lot of fans are too. The MCU formula wasn't so bad like it is now. Phases 1 and 2 had a small formula which wasn't really noticeable. Phase 3 was when the formula was really hammered in and noticeable, but to me it didn't matter because I loved the characters and I was invested with the stories. The MCU was trying to do something that has never been done before with all of this connectivity, so they kept it a bit formulaic. It also helped that the MCU shows at the time, the pre-Disney Plus shows never followed the MCU formula, which didn't make the MCU feel like everything was the same. We are now in Phase 5, and the formula somehow has gotten worse from Phase 3, and what I mean by that is 90% of the MCU projects now feel the same, and it's all pretty predictable due to the formula. There's other problems too, like, the quality and consistency, but the formula and just the way these movies are made is such a big problem right now that I hope can be fixed. One way the MCU formula can be fixed is getting rid of it altogether. They shouldn't even try to go back to the formula they used to have in phases 1 and 2 because the MCU won't survive if they go back to more of the same, even though the old formula was better and allowed more originality within each MCU project. They need to do something with their movies, and that's where X-Men First Class comes in. X-Men First Class is kind of the perfect superhero movie for the MCU in terms of what the MCU needs to do with their movies in the future. The only true thing this movie needed was to be a bit more comic accurate, but it is what it is. I chose X-Men First Class for a few reasons as to why the MCU needs to look at this movie as to how their future movies can be like or similar to. First off, X-Men First Class has a perfect balance in tones. X-Men First Class had a bit of humor, it got dark at times, it got wholesome, it was action-packed, and there was a bit of thriller in there as well because there were so many moments where First Class kept me at the edge of my seat. We know the MCU will never get too dark unless maybe on Disney Plus, but if they want to make their movies not super gritty, then it's cool, I guess. I wish they could make dark movies once in a while, but it is what it is. I feel like X-Men First Class in many ways is the type of movie that could have came out of Phase 1 of the MCU in terms of tone. X-Men First Class is not a super dark movie or a super light movie either. There's a nice balance of everything, which is something the MCU needs. There's also the amount of creativity First Class had with its shots, direction, and storytelling. There were so many scenes that were so memorable and just very unique. Like the opening scene where Eric has the coin going through his hands, it's a creative scene that also tells so much about the story. Even the transitions were so creative. And what I really like about some of these transitions that were in X-Men First Class is like some of them kind of moved like a comic panel. I felt like they were really cool and unique for a comic book movie, and I think it kind of fits a comic book movie as well. A lot of this was because Fox let Matthew Vaughn do the shots he wanted to do. And it seems like Fox pretty much allowed a good amount of creative freedom for Matthew Vaughn to do what he wanted to do with this movie. I'm not sure if the MCU will ever allow directors to have more creative freedoms and do more unique things with their directing and writing. I would love if the MCU just let their directors and writers be completely free with the script and directing, and just let these creative minds go free with the certain MCU projects. That's the dream, but I'm not sure if that will ever really happen. You even can see in Phase 1 there was some sort of like handicap on how free they were allowed to be with their movies. If there's a little bit of a handicap, then it is what it is, because I love Phases 1 through 3 either way, even with their limits on the creative freedom that the directors have. But it seems like they got more strict with the creative freedom as time has gone on, and I think they really need to let directors have a bit more of a vision. If that can't happen, then I would like to see very creative scenes like X-Men First Class had. Shots that look very artistic but aren't just very flashy, like each scene tells something about the characters in the story. As someone who is also a fan of movies, not just comics, I really appreciate scenes that are so creative that also tell so much about the story and what's going through the characters' heads in each scene. A lot of recent MCU projects just have scenes in lifeless CGI for the heck of it. I would like to make something clear. Not every MCU project is so problematic right now. Sure, a lot of people are going to be like, oh, look at WandaVision, that was really creative, or look at Spider-Man No Way Home. Both of those were pretty creative, and it seems like they really had a voice and a vision in some ways, but you could still see the MCU formula within those movies. It's just not as bad as it is with the majority of Phase 4. The problem is the majority of MCU projects right now post Phase 3 have had so many problems. They felt lifeless. The MCU formula is just too much. And overall, there's just a big problem right now, and we're in Phase 5, and the Wasp: Quantumania, it has the same problems as Phase 4, so it looks like everything's just pretty much staying static at the moment. One more thing about X-Men First Class when it comes to the creativity of this movie was the final fight to take down the villain was so creative and original. The way Shaw got taken out was from a freaking coin, and that whole sequence was so badass. And not only that, that whole final takedown of Shaw had so much symbolism. The way Eric killed Shaw was very similar to how Shaw killed Eric's mother. Eric was doing that same countdown that Shaw did to Eric when he was a child. Also, the coin going through Shaw's head could have meant like many different things, like it was the end of this villain and the rise of another villain, and the end of Shaw and the rise of Magneto. Also, this was the end of Charles and Eric's friendship, and after this point they become frenemies. Honestly, when was the last time a superhero movie had such a interesting final main villain ending? And the way Shaw was taken down, it was just so unique too. Like a coin going through his head, that was the final fight. It was just really sad, and it told so much what was going to happen to the characters in the future of the story. The final fight is just a man pushing a coin through the villain's head, and somehow one of the most badass but saddest moments in superhero history. Then after that, you have Eric going bad, and when the missiles fire at the island and at them, he fires back at them. We have this edge of your seat sequence of what's going to happen next. Eric and Charles were going at it. Charles was trying to stop Eric from killing those innocent men that were just following orders. Not everyone was innocent, but a lot of them were just innocent men following orders. Then in the end, Eric accidentally causes Charles to be paralyzed, and he ends up in the wheelchair and becomes Professor X. You guys get the point. Not everything needs to be like this big, gigantic showcase, and the villain needs to fight all the heroes, and it's just, you don't always need like a big, gigantic CGI final battle. I mean, there was a battle in this movie, but to take down the main villain, there wasn't no battle. It was just a coin through the guy's head, and then two best friends no longer become friends. I'm not saying to always go out of the norm, but it would be nice to get some different type of superhero battles, like some different type of superhero fights. And I know in Guardians of the Galaxy that was a bit unique and different with their final boss battle with Star-Lord dancing and singing to take down the main villain, and that was pretty funny. But the majority, it's like the same predictable fight, cliche, CGI battle, and I like it sometimes, but it's just, I want some uniqueness. I think the MCU would really benefit from having some sort of unique final boss battle, or just something very simple like X-Men First Class did. I want to always feel like I'm watching some sort of product with predictable antics, and I think the MCU needs something different. X-Men First Class, what it did from beginning to end, it's different from a lot of other superhero movies. Just be different. MCU movies and the TV shows too, not the old TV shows, the current TV shows, they all need to have their own identity, and they don't have a different identity. They all feel the same. It's all getting mushed together. Another thing too, X-Men First Class had a lot to say. There was so much you could take away from this movie other than it being the beginnings of the X-Men, the brotherhood, and the friendship and falling out of Charles and Eric. In X-Men First Class, there was a constant message of being mutant and proud. I feel like that message from the film can be interpreted to mean many different things that could apply to modern day life. I interpreted that phrase as meaning being proud of who you are and accepting yourself. Another thing I came away from this movie was something Charles said to Eric. Charles told Eric he finds that the true focus comes from rage and serenity. I don't think that's a metaphor. I think that's just something that I believe is true. But either way, that's something I took away from this movie as well. There's also the metaphor of what being a mutant really means and what it truly represents to our modern day society. If you read X-Men comics, you know what I mean. Like, mutants are symbolism to other stuff that happens in real life. I'm sure there's other hidden metaphors and things you could take away from this movie that I just never really realized or seen. The point is, it's just not a prequel movie just to have like, oh, this is what happened here, here, and there. I took away from something with this movie. It impacted me, and it wasn't just some sort of setup for other stuff. Yes, I mean, there was some like setup, like the beginning of the X-Men, set up like what actually happened. But X-Men First Class was more than just that as well. Now, not every MCU movie needs to have some sort of message to take away from or impact you in some sort of way. Sometimes it could just be a comedy. It's also all about how it's executed as well. There are MCU projects that try to have some sort of like thing you can take away from the TV show or from the movie. But a lot of times it feels rushed, and it has those forced comedy moments that just like kind of ruins the message or any kind of thing you can take away from the movie or TV show. Also, again, I just want to reiterate, I'm talking about projects post Phase 3. One final big thing I want to talk about when it comes to like the overall making of this movie is the soundtrack that this movie had. I feel like the MCU post Phase 3 forgot how important music is to cinema. You could tell they just put whatever in the score and think the audience will just eat it up. It's also mostly just like forgettable too. Like I just watched Ant-Man 3 not too long ago and I can't remember any music that stood out. Post Phase 3, music felt mostly lifeless and generic shit except in the Multiverse of Madness because Danny Elfman is a genius. X-Men First Class has one of the most underrated soundtracks in movie history. Like seriously, the Frankenstein monster theme for Magneto was freaking amazing. It's like Imperial March amazing in my opinion. I'll put the link to the theme in the description below just in case you haven't heard the amazing theme because I can't play it in this video because, you know, copyright. But it's really memorable and it's really catchy and it's just such a great theme for Magneto. There's other great pieces of music in the soundtrack as well. But another one that really sticks out to me was the main theme, which was supposed to be for the X-Men team. It was like the heroic theme, which I will also put in the link in the description below. It's the best X-Men theme of all time in my opinion. It's better than the themes that the other movies had and the animated shows. I really hope the MCU brings back this X-Men's theme for their movies, but I doubt it. And instead, I bet the theme for the X-Men in the MCU will be the version of the theme from the 90s animated TV series. It'll be like a remix version or a more cinematic version of the 90s animated TV series theme. Either way, the MCU needs to remember how important music is to cinema and not just put anything down for the sake of it. So moving forward, I say with the TV shows, all they need to do is have things back to the way they were before Disney Plus starting to do the MCU shows. The old MCU shows were perfect the way they were. For better or for worse, each show had an identity. There was an actual vision to every series and it didn't feel like some product with some generic formula with some cheap CGI. Like, they felt like real TV shows back then that tried to tell some sort of story worth caring about. So what the MCU shows need is to make the shows like they used to make them before Disney Plus started to take over all the MCU shows. What MCU movies need is to look at X-Men First Class.